Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for this first hybrid session for CogX today. As our on-stage moderator explains, we're going to discuss the financial transformation around data and analytics today. Very pleased, I'm Matthew Gardiner, I'm founder of A1AI. I consult to banks and financial institutions globally on AI and DeFi and all those kind of fast things. And very pleased to also have here today Laura O'Sullivan from Accenture, Banking Analytics Lead, and James Bickerton, Director of Analytics and Strategy at HSBC. So look forward to a really engaging conversation today about how analytics have really transformed customer journeys and how we can get the next 5 to 10 years right with that. So Laura, pleased to be here with you, well, virtually, and James, thanks for being in the studio. I know we spoke briefly before about this topic. I wonder really what comes to mind when you think about your journeys of digital transformation around analytics with consumers and the future. What comes to mind first, Laura?
Well, hi there, Matthew. Hi there, James. Really excited to join you, albeit virtually. Very excited that James, it looks like he's managed to leave the house, which is excellent, much needed at the moment. Fascinated to come and join you really to talk about this, because I think we've all observed that obviously the pace of change has massively ramped up over the course of the last year. There's been a lot that's been reported, particularly around changing mindsets, both in the banks, but I think interestingly within consumers and within customers as well, both in terms of their needs, but also consumer behaviours. It's not hard to see that in terms of areas like digital payments and also digital engagement, we've seen those things massively step up due to necessity. And a client was asking me just last week, do we believe that that is something that's happened through necessity and then things slow down again and return to normal? And I'm not sure in those terms what we mean by normal, but I think it's hard to believe that's the case. And I think some of the most interesting conversations we're having at the moment is, now that the least interesting thing about what we've lived through in terms of the rapid increase in digital engagement is the new customer segments that are using digital services. I think the most interesting thing is, how do we change the nature of our engagement with consumers now that we are primarily having digital interactions, across many segments, and particularly in areas like payments, where we've seen rapidly 54% more consumers using digital payments. What are some of the opportunities that creates in terms of how you can build and add on consumer services using analytics and advanced understanding of customer behaviour to foster that? And I think we've started to see that in small scale with things like buy now, pay later solutions, but I think we're really just at the start of that.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I know James perhaps have similar experience around this. And also we can't forget post-COVID or during the pandemic, how much of a shift there has been towards digital channels. I know that analog ones are suffering too, in a way, and we see kind of shipping oversubscribed to a great degree, but I think digital copes better. So James, I wondered, could you talk about the background to your work, how you've seen change evolve?
Sure. So I can really speak from a corporate and institutional perspective, less of a retail perspective. But for us, I guess there's kind of 3 steps that we see ourselves go through. So we're internally maturing our own. Any chance we can mute the feedback? Thanks. We're going through our own innovation. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback in the room. We're going through our own internal innovation and helping advancing our propositions, which is helping our clients, so big corporate, multinational enterprises, think about the basic kind of innovation and simplification of their financial operations, which is kind of the bread and butter, or the simple bit, or the slightly boring part. But I think the exciting next 10 years or next 2-3 years, to be honest, is what you call embedded finance or banking as a service, or these kind of terminology where actually, like with the Internet of Things, has to permeate inside our clients' value chains, right? So you already see it with e-commerce platforms and their and the micro wallets and point of sale financing, all of that kind of stuff that you see on an Amazon, etc. But actually, that's going to permeate everywhere. So I think we're really excited because that's going to be the next big trend. Is okay, you've got your own financial operations, your payments, your accounts all in order. How do you then touch the client's clients? So
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we agree we're right at the beginning of the journey. I wonder, what have you seen so far as well in terms of the past year, how rapid has uptake been? And I know also we look at changes in the nature of relationships, as you were saying, Rachel, I know we touched on before, James too. I mean, how these relationships really changed. I've seen it a lot in my practice around deeper engagement with clients, once they understand how much more they can get out of it, and also creating ancillary revenue streams. I think in order to do that, you have to have a much more integrated approach to clients and be much more attentive to them, and there's more opportunity to do that. I guess really, what are the benefits? What do you see that's come out of it so far that's really worked?
So from my perspective, I guess our clients have been a lot more open to medical thinking. I think the COVID kind of scenarios played out such that they are really rethinking their own value chains. They're really thinking about their propositions. When you look at healthcare, we've done very unique solutions around vaccine distribution, for example. When we look at some of the other retail players who have suffered from a drop in physical footfall, they're looking at their own e-commerce marketplaces. So I think it's just meant that clients are thinking a lot more radically. They're open to new ideas, and there's new people at the table, which is kind of started pre-COVID. So I wouldn't say it's a COVID outcome, but it's certainly a lot more apparent now that, when you go into a client, you're not just talking to, the treasurer or the CFO or the head of procurement. You're talking now to their CIOs, or CTOs. You're talking to their sustainability officers. There's a whole new range of personas, to use a cheesy word, that are at the table. So that's quite exciting for us, and certainly something we're looking to in the next couple of years capitalize on by making sure that there's more expertise from inside our world facing off those people, and we get bigger partnerships, broader propositions, bigger opportunities.
Yes, I'm aware that we're kind of, because we specialize in digital transformation, I've been in it for a long time, I'm sure we all have, we're kind of at the vanguard, but then I see teams transforming behind us as well quite rapidly, and I see the same in businesses too. I wonder, have you seen that too, Laura?
Yes, I'd agree. Certainly in terms of sort of, as James said, the different personas and characters who are involved in these types of decisions. I think it's really interesting to see where that takes us in terms of, how do these services evolve? And particularly, as we mentioned on the topic of sustainability, how important that is going to be going forward, and how might that change the paradigm of the types of questions that we have to answer when we're thinking about analytic solutions, and particularly the mass scaling of those.
Absolutely. And also, obviously, there's a big cultural shift that takes place. That's kind of general knowledge now. I think what's less known is the need for clean data, or data with parity. That kind of boring work which you have to grind out first. Do you have experience of that?
Is that to me? So certainly from our
I can to all of us, really, just as a kind of progression point. I see in my practice, I work a lot in Asia as well. Getting parity data is essential. It can be sometimes a long lead time, sometimes quite short. Once that's done, you're in a much better place. But I wondered how you'd experienced that, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a starting point and a challenge, obviously, with when we look at obviously some of the large banks. They are significant data holders. I think some of the largest data holders after the NHS, for example, in the UK. So the scale and complexity can't be ignored in terms of the foundational work that's needed around clean data. But obviously, what we can't get away from is then being able to prioritize where's the value and what are the opportunities and the use cases that need to be exploited, and trying to manage the foundational work with that, because at the pace at which things are changing, we can't be allowing large programs that are just foundational. We have to be looking at how do we actually drive value from this, and how can we help retail and corporate clients in terms of evolving new services, because certainly we talked about how banks' mindset and consumer mindset is changing. The interesting entrance into this is also the fact that there's going to be government support as well for the further building out of fintech, which I think is really exciting and comes at probably a very helpful time in terms of how we're trying to build what is a really significant sector for the UK economy. And I think particularly when we look at things like the Khalifa Review and talking about, how is the UK somewhere that fintechs can scale up rather than just start up, I think that offers amazing opportunities for not just incumbent banks, but for UK economy in terms of evolving those types of services.
I agree. We'll have Anne Bowden tomorrow from Starling and Rush Shaw at Tech London Advocates talking about the Khalifa report and review. So yeah, I think the UK has a big advantage there. There's so much to unpack in this piece. I just wanted to keep you up to speed in the conversation too, James. Or keep you.
Yeah, I think there's quite an interesting dynamic, certainly I'd say for banks at the moment, that we have to both generate the demand, right? So we need to be talking to our clients, understanding what services and innovation they need, talking to our frontline colleagues, understanding what analytics, what insight they need, and at the same time building the foundations that Laura touched on. And you've got to strike a careful balance there, because unless you have the demand, we don't justify the investment to build the supply, so to speak. And building analytics is one thing, and I think quite a lot of organizations have got that right. And there's analytics you can do that's kind of 80-20, that's directional, that generates a lot of value. But once you want to get that into operational use cases and you want to use it to generate, I don't know, leads that turn into pipeline and into revenue, or you want to use it for financial crime or for monitoring service quality with clients, those kind of really hardcore operational cases, it becomes a lot more a lot more difficult at that point. And the layers of infrastructure that you need to build to take that data from all your disparate systems around the world, bring it together, clean it, cleanse it, link it up, normalize it, create data assets that you can reuse for multiple use cases, build your models, build your model frameworks, build your distribution, put it into your front end platforms. It's just like a myriad of layers that you have to go through. And that takes a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears to get that into a production quality such that you can generate value, right? So unless you've got a real array of demand out there that justifies the money to get there, you're almost set to fail from the beginning. And we've only just, I'd say, in the last year got that right. And actually we have now use cases that are delivering through that kind of complex stack. And we're just, I'd say, now about to scale that. And the next 2-3 years for us will be very exciting. But people often underestimate that, complexity.
Absolutely, and all the more reason to be in the UK in a way, which talks about the Khalifa Review and how we're in a good position with our fintechs and partners, and also just to wind back a little bit and get to the very important topic of climate change and ESG. I know, Rachel, you touched on that. I've seen that become a priority like no other, really. Across all asset classes, retail, commercial, doesn't really matter where. It's on everyone's minds. I mean, you only had to look at London before the pandemic when we had all of the demonstrations. I've never seen so many families come out to demonstrate. That's number one, but also, talking to bondholders, or it doesn't matter who, it's a big issue. I wonder, what have you seen around that in analytics, and as this evolves, what kind of appetite is there, and have you identified any solutions around it? It's an evolving piece, obviously, but just wondering.
It's definitely evolving. But as you say, we've definitely seen, particularly in the last year, a huge amount, not just of activism, but interest from clients and from consumer sectors. I suppose the two things that we're seeing are, as you mentioned, particular product types, so pensions and investments, having a much keener eye in terms of, how can we actually help to classify, obviously in line with the ESG guidance, how can we accurately classify those investments, and how do we ensure that we're therefore well positioned to make sure that our product mix is meeting what is a big wave of consumer interest in this area, because particularly in areas like pensions, you can see there's huge values at stake in terms of making sure that you're accurately giving access to funds where consumers actually understand where that money is held and what it is supporting. I think the other interesting wave we've seen, and it's just one example, I think, of what's going to be a wave of new services, is areas like carbon tracking. So I think there's a whole wave of fintechs. I'll mention just one of them, Tread, who I think were massively overfunded when they released around actually how do you use open APIs to pull in carbon tracking data linked to people's payment spending. It's just one example, but I think it's quite interesting to see where's the uptake for that. In my own mind, and I was having this conversation last week with one of the CDOs, is it going to be like step counts in the way that I never knew how many steps I took 3 years ago before I had it on my iPhone? Is it something that will actually become in current currency, that now I know I do around 12,000 every day? I have no idea what my carbon track footprint would be against my payments. Is that something that in the next 3 to 4 years I'll have a much more mature understanding of, and how might that therefore shift my consumer behaviour? Will be an interesting thing to see.
Absolutely. I think it might well, if we look at Google and what Eric Schmidt said a while ago, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So, I have no idea of my carbon footprint either. I've also got no idea of how long a lot of the initiatives that I'm involved with are going to continue for, interesting things like covenants around that. I don't understand the value chain. I work in analytics, but I do think if the value chain is presented to you in an easy format, you can engage with it quite easily. So yeah, very interesting to see what will happen going forward. And obviously there's a pressing need for real change here. The world is giving us a very strong message, as we've seen, which is backed by science. So yeah, glad we've covered that. I think it's a very big driver. It's so interesting to me too to see how much confluence there is really, so around AI, around even blockchain, sometimes DeFi, around all different manners, finance, all different channels. There seem to be some common gains or common objectives. Have you seen that too, James, in your work? I know you're much more in the commercial sector, but have you seen this kind of influencing general trends?
Absolutely. We have working groups and initiatives kind of touching all of these major innovations. I think just on the ESG topic, it's one of these unique topics that permeates everything, right? So we have our own internal commitments that we've made to the market around our own ESG goals, and so we're supporting that in kind of for our particular division. But the bigger impact for us is what's our clients' trajectories, what are their plans, and how do we help them understand their own kind of scope 1, 2, 3 views and the impact on their supply chains. And we have products that help them in sustainable financing, CapEx stuff to help them, for whether it's on emissions, for example. We have green deposits. We have a multitude of different things where ESG is touching as a topic. And so from an analytical point of view, we took the decision around 6 months ago to create what we call ESG as a service. So we're building out a capability that around 30 different teams across the business will be able to leverage and use to understand and cut the data in different ways to solve the particular lens that they need. As I said, it could be in the sustainable finance kind of in the core kind of capital or bond issuance space, but it could be right down to some of the work we do with clients around their supply chains on at a really granular level. And so whether it's ESG, whether it's the embedded finance, it's AI, it's robotics, they're all kind of key topics for us. But what really, really matters is actually how do we get back to the client lens and understand what they're trying to achieve and work out what's the right tools in the toolbox to help them solve their problems. And we often forget that. And so it's very easy to get distracted internally by running around with a robot looking for a problem. And actually what we need to do is get back to being client-centric and try and do smaller, higher impact initiatives.
Yeah, I agree. And what I've noticed too, coming from London where we have all this innovation, is that the lab is often outside, right? So we have our internal labs, which are very useful, but I've just seen that the client come more and more to the center of the conversation as they've been able to, as digital channels have evolved. So I wonder, could you tell us more about how that's working? I know you're excited about it, James, kind of, increased interactions with clients and learning from them. How's your practice changed around clients kind of being at the center?
Absolutely. So I guess we're going through quite an evolution at the moment where we're going from kind of what I would call a transactional relationship with a lot of our clients, offering kind of off-the-shelf products, helping, we have a huge client base and a wealth of different opportunity in that. But it is very point to point. You have the trade person talking to the head of procurement, you have our head banker talking to the treasurer. It's kind of transactional, it's point to point. And actually what we want to do is get back to being kind of a broader view, look at the client strategy, get into client co-creation, which is a bit of a buzzword, but how do we get in the room with their C-suite and talk about a multitude of different products that all come together to solve their strategic problems overall? And I know that sounds a bit waffly, but really it's quite a change for us. Cross product, we have internally everyone together and actually talk to the clients at that strategic dialogue level. And we do it already. Just to be very clear, we do it in great pockets all over the organization. Now we're trying to industrialize that across the full portfolio, and that means we're using new content management solutions. We're using new, collaborative technologies to help it. It's a big change in the ways of working, and it's not unique to us. Like the whole industry is changing in this way, but it's quite exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Existing governance structures change quite dramatically in a way, and I guess the systems come in to support that. And Laura, have you seen that too? I'm really glad to catch up with both of you, by the way. Not catch up, but just discuss all of this. It's not often we get to have conversations across the industry like this, so thanks to CogX for it too. But have you seen this kind of drift towards more, we're in a waffly area, I know, in a way, but have you seen this move towards more integrated services or more oversight from different divisions into each other? Have you seen that kind of solidify around governance and become something real rather than just a concept that needs fleshing out?
I think we're definitely seeing more collaboration. So I think we and this isn't just something of the last 12 months, but we've obviously seen banks increasingly be reaching out beyond their four walls in terms of what are those new types of products and servicing that they're offering. I think we'll continue to see that, because when we talk about things like embedded finance, we can start to see that we're not just speeding up the pace of digitization, but we're going to see that becomes almost regulatory encouraged in terms of we're moving from obviously the world of open data that started back with PSD2 through to sort of open finance in terms of what are the new opportunities, new markets that banks can get into. And I think that's also really evident in terms of the retail sector. And just this morning I was reading a piece where John Lewis, I think, had publicly said that they're expecting 40% of the revenues to be non-retail by 2030, and there'll be a chunk of that will be financial services. We've talked for a while saying every business is a digital business. I think when you look at it, every business is a finance business. So I think that's really evident in terms of that types of collaboration and interoperability that, let's face it, a number of banks aren't built for, needs to come to the fore going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I know we're coming towards the end of our slot now. Time's passed quickly, but I agree. Yeah, embedded finance and every company being a finance company, every company being a digital company, I think it just become the new way forward. It just seems to become possible now. That seems to sum it up for me. Embedded finance seems to run as a common thread. Do you agree, James? What do you think in summing up? How can you get everything you do into one sentence, or past, present, future? How can you summarize that?
Sure. So from my perspective, I think it's all about collaboration. So we're working with Accenture, we're working with Quantum Black, one of your other sponsors here. We've got probably 7 or 8 different fintech capabilities within that kind of complex stack I talked about earlier. So I only see more and more collaboration happening over the next 5-10 years. People finding a real sweet spot of capability, doubling down on making the best quality product or service that they can, and then the use of all of the new technologies, APIs, etc., to connect all this stuff together. That I can't see us being disrupted to an endpoint that we're no longer relevant by a Google or an Amazon. I think it's more partnership with big tech, use of fintech technologies, collaboration with academia, with regulators, with governments. So I'm really excited because it's just an opportunity to work with more and more smarter, smart people. So that's great.
Yeah, the conversation certainly seems to have broadened, I'd say. I find lots of regulators, I'm sure you probably agree, very welcoming now, very proactive as the model changes. I wonder, Laura, what do you think in summing up? I spoke about embedded finance, but what do you think in terms of collaboration in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd agree exactly with what James is saying, really, around the continued need for collaboration and partnerships is sort of coming to the fore. And we've seen that previously, but we think that will obviously need to continue. You mentioned regulators. It obviously becomes really interesting for the regulators then in terms of how do they create the right types of environments so that they can be helping to safely foster and encourage those types of collaborations. And obviously the FCA have been taking a number of steps to make sure that they are really driving forwards in terms of supporting that type of environment as well. Because as much as we can talk about the ongoing support for fintech, we need to create the right sort of regulatory environment so that we can allow people to safely experiment and allow businesses to thrive really in terms of what the new future holds. But I'd agree it is really exciting and interesting in terms of the new types of talent that are coming into the business and the new types of voices as well who are going to take financial services forward.
Yeah, I think we really are living through an evolution. Just on that note, we are open for questions. If you have any questions, please do submit them or ask them. So yeah, exciting moment as we move forward. I definitely agree. And coming from London too has been an asset, I would say, working around the world. We have one of the first regulatory sandboxes, which was, cloned in many ways, or, it was a good model, which was replicated around the world. I think we still have a lot of expertise here. We've kind of been the future in the way. So I hope we can continue to build on that. And I look forward to hearing from Bowden at Starling tomorrow, and also Russ Shaw at TLA going to discuss the Tarifa review. But yeah, I think we're in a good position. I wonder, James, what do you think about? You spoke a lot too about new talent, new voices coming in. But do you see anything particularly in your practice, or have you seen anything with clients which kind of speaks to that?
I guess less with the clients, but certainly internally we're really exploring, avoid using cheesy terms, but kind of the new talent development pipelines that we want to leverage. So we obviously go out to universities, bring in graduate talent, we bring in professional hires at kind of junior and senior levels. And actually the overwhelming feedback when we talk to those groups around their futures and their careers is they want to be multidisciplinary. They want to see different topics. They want to be exposed to things like ESG clearly. So we are evaluating what that means for us, and really the likelihood being that we create much more rotational programs. We stitch together the ability to work in different products and service groups by using a particular topic. Maybe it's ESG, maybe it's embedded finance. And so we want to create a much more fluid workforce. And, in the end of the day, for some of the millennial talent that's coming through now, and I consider myself no longer junior talent, and they throw us out the water with their knowledge, their skills, their excitement. And so we certainly don't want to dampen that. And I think the important part there is just to give them more and more opportunity and just let them thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there. I've taught a lot of students at Cass Business School around that. Also gave a lecture at the Royal College of Art recently on NFTs. So that's a far out use case, but I had design students looking at the financial element of their design through an NFT, which I found really quite fascinating. Many questions afterwards as well. So I think there is space now to be on the periphery of financial services, but still be somehow engaged. I think we'll see much more kind of multidisciplinary leaders. The idea of a chief data officer as well, often in the Middle East, that comes around a lot, because obviously a lot of data systems in the Middle East need to have a, and speaking very broadly here, but have need of creating some kind of parity. I don't see that so much in Asia, but multidisciplinary going forward, I think is interesting. And that to me is always a big piece when I'm talking to C-suite about responsibility as well. I think previously one used to delegate responsibility for an area to a certain director. And now, as data has come to the fore, I find that C-suite find themselves directly responsible. They need to be savvy on these matters and well educated. Also, cybersecurity as well. That's another big piece. But I just find the need for more integration in leadership really, and a more kind of rounded skill set. I don't
Thank
know. We've come quite far in terms of looking at just through what we're talking about, to looking at raw data being in a bit of a pickle quite often, needing to be cleaned and have parity, right through to now having visionary leaders or multi-talented leaders, or kind of multidisciplinary, doesn't work well, I'd say. Any more thoughts on the future or the application of analytics? Or I know Laurie spoke about interoperability as well. That's a word which 5 years ago I used to have feedback saying, so when I spoke to C-suite, they'd say you spoke about interoperability a lot. What does it mean? Now people really getting it. But I guess, what are the main areas for anybody who's outside of this area? What are the main areas of interoperability which we're focusing on at the moment? Do you see any trends there?
Well, I suppose the one word that we haven't mentioned on this journey is responsibility. And I suppose it's hard for us to talk about data and data sharing without talking about responsibility. We do a consumer survey each year, and we did see that was one of the biggest changes that we've seen, is actually more willingness for consumers to be open to sharing data. But obviously with that comes the responsibility on the bank side in terms of how that may be used, and what's the value exchange in terms of the types of personalisation or services that can be offered. I still think there's quite huge changes and opportunities, particularly in some sectors, not just traditional areas like FinCrime, credit risk, which have been well explored, but particularly in terms of sort of the areas of mass market advice, which I think is likely to come to the fore over the next few years. And I think that'll be interesting in terms of not really just what's the technical possibility, but how do we make sure that we're acting on that responsibly and with the consumer in mind. So when we talk about interoperability, I've got two daughters who are 9 and 11, and I'm quite fascinated about what does the future hold if they're getting investment advice from TikTok. How do we manage to govern for that type of order?
Yeah, really interesting. I find that as well, particularly, outside of this conversation really, but around DeFi, and at the moment, I know crypto is only 2% of global MT money supply, but there are a lot of issues that need resolving there. So yeah, going forward, how do we ensure that responsibility is baked in, I guess, and people have enough digital literacy in order to ensure that their intended responsibilities are carried out. Absolutely, it's a big topic for me. Do you see that too, James?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, putting ethics aside for a second, from a responsibility point of view, anyone who's worked in data for any period of time knows that cross-border data sharing and the privacy impact piece, i.e. GDPR, etc., can be a real quagmire, right? We have to be very diligent in how you handle the data, but you don't want it to be the blocker to solving your use cases, etc. So we've invested quite a lot of time in unpicking what are the dimensions that you need to think about, whether it's what type of data use it is, what type of data, or the types of data itself, the end users, the locations, all those different dimensions, and trying to codify that into the platform and work with the local teams in each country to say, okay, what are your hard rules in the platform? Bring that to life such that we can then move use cases at pace. So I completely agree that you have to be truly respectful, obviously, of the law and of the regulation, but you need to think smart around how you implement that such that it doesn't become a blocker. There's a question in the room here, if we have the...
Yeah, we have just a minute or so left, I think, to take it.
Go for it. I'll just repeat it back to them.
Thank you. I know, apologies, we have to close quite soon. I wonder, could you... Do you have a quick?
It's a great question in the room. Basically, the question was: Is there a risk that we're oversaturating our employees and our colleagues with too much innovation? Absolutely, I think it's the answer, right? Especially when in an organization like HSBC, we have major transformational programs going on, and some might be regionally driven, some might be driven through a product line, some through a service line, and they can overlap and impact some teams in every way, right? And so you get these teams that are getting somewhat attacked from 7 different angles, and that's a big concern for us. So, I think the way we try and do it is through that same client centricity lens. So if they can't tie back the initiative they're trying to drive to the client strategy that we're trying to implement, and therefore they can't align to the benefits and therefore and the outcomes that we're after, then it shouldn't really be prioritized. There's some exceptions to that, like regulatory change, right, where you have to obviously stay in the line of the law. But yeah, we did this very recently. So it's a great question because we did it very recently in our data stack, and all the book of work there has gone 10 times grown 10 times over the last 18 months. But actually, when you start to dig into that and you filter out the stuff that hasn't got that kind of strategic alignment, hasn't got a clear benefits case, is a kind of nice to have, it really rationalizes it down and you can be much more focused. So I hate to say no to people around the world around if they want to do innovation, and certainly it's not my job to say no to them, to be clear, right? There's people with bigger paychecks than me, but can we help them understand whether it fits a strategic purpose? And in a lot of cases, maybe someone's already doing it, and they just need to collaborate and work with another program. They've got the same idea. So yeah, I think it is a risk, but I think there's easy ways to manage that risk. Sorry, long-winded answer.
Sorry. I think as a data person, you're really well qualified to make that decision, James. Interesting that you come into this strategic role, from a kind of position of dealing with data. So, yeah, I think that summarizes everything, I think, really quite well. We see we've gone from looking at data in pieces to it being more formalized. We've also looked at ESG. We looked at responsibility as a big theme. We looked at Khalifa Report and the UK as a leading innovator in the space. So we have a lot of providers. And finally, we come through to kind of the multidisciplinary piece and how you handle that. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel refreshed, I would say, and much more well-rounded and much more connected. It's a good thing to do, I would say. It's actually talk about what we're doing. So thank you very much for joining me here. I wondered, do you have anything else to say just to sum up?
Thanks very much, Matthew. Thanks, James. Really nice to chat through.